Good evening. It is, according to my clock, 7:02. I'm going to do a roll call to establish quorum. So please answer that you are here. Joe Ali.
Here.
Richard Keys.
Here.
Jean Case.
Here.
Frank Visconti.
Here.
Vanessa Rossi.
Here.
Patrick Heffernan.
Here.
Erica Jacobson. Here. So all 7 members are present tonight. And we are ready to open the meeting. First order of business is to review and approve our meeting minutes from the March 5th meeting, which were attached to the agenda. And would entertain a motion to accept the meeting minutes.
Second.
Any edits or discussion? We're good? All those in favor of accepting the meeting minutes? Aye. Opposed? All right. Approved. Okay, so those first 2 things. To start the meeting tonight, because we are going to be discussing the warrant for the annual town meeting, there's a few special guests here tonight who I'd like to recognize and make sure that we give approval to speak as needed to inform our discussions tonight. We, in addition to Tracy, who's part of our committee and non-voting member, we have Alicia Greco, Select Board Chair, Marshall Jesperson, Capital Planning Chair, Martha Taylor and Kristen Grubbs from the Planning Board, and Lisa Mead, our Town Council, and also Jeff, if you wish, I will also have Select Board Member Walker. Jeff Walker is here as well, and I just want to give approval to let them speak as needed during the meeting. So I don't know we need to take a vote or anything on that, but
You're the chair.
we're all good. I recognize you all, know who you are. And I expect you to just kind of talk as we ask questions and work there. I do want to review tonight, anticipating that we may have, because this is a very important meeting of the Finance Committee where we go over the warrant articles. Tonight we will, we did, as per our public comment policy, we are not only having public comment at the beginning of the meeting, but also we have built it into agenda items. However, seeing no members of the public other than those individuals I already recognized, I will read the public comment and then we'll start the meeting. To receive oral communications from members of the public may address the Finance Committee for up to 3 minutes. The Finance Committee will not engage in discussion on topics raised during public comment, but may choose to add the topic to a future agenda. This agenda segment will be limited to 15 minutes. Also, as part of our public comment, the chair will share any written or email communications received since our last meeting, which was March 5th. Attached to your packet are 3 correspondence, 2 from Jack Rybicki and 1 from former Select Board member Geraldine Heavey. They are all in regards to the warrant article number 21 with the PEG access and cable related fund. So we will look at those letters and discuss as needed during that portion of the agenda. So, seeing no public comment. Tracy, we'll start with Town Administrator's report and kind of a budget overview, just a little, anything we need to know business-wise.
So hopefully everyone's received a copy of the budget document. If you have any specific questions, I'm happy to entertain those. We have the presentation that you received is a balanced budget. I think we went over all the special articles at our last meeting, so you have an idea of what's going to be before the voters. finalizing the appropriations booklet. And then you'll have that for review, and I assume you're gonna be taking your votes this evening?
We will be taking our votes this evening unless there's any reason to table an issue for unforeseen. I'm pulling out for just reference. This is a copy of the Finance Committee Appropriations booklet from last year's town meeting. There's typically a budget letter at the beginning of it that I will prepare and share with the, it's a letter to Newbury voters explaining what this booklet is about. And I will share this with the committee for approval before we publish. But what this is set up to do is to provide rationale of all the Finance Committee, of all of the appropriations on here and Finance Committee, and at such time, the select boards recommend, votes to recommend, not recommend each article as appropriate.
Question.
Of course.
Has the Board of Selectmen already taken this vote on these?
No,
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 They
they're
follow
voting
us.
next Tuesday.
they approved the warrant,
Okay,
They
Their
did
warrant is
approve the
set.
warrant, yeah.
okay.
that they have not taken their votes to approve or not approve yet. So those will be added later. I believe that's next week's meeting. So, all right, so any questions for Tracy before we begin? I'm sure we will come through as we discuss this evening. Under the ATM warrant review, I want to remind everyone that the purpose of the ATM of the annual town meeting is to vote on the budget recommendations and bylaw changes for fiscal year 2025, which begins on July 1st, 2024. The Finance Committee is required to make recommendation at town meeting on those articles that call for an appropriation or expenditure of funds. To this end, after the warrant articles are approved by the Select Board, which they have been, the Finance Committee reviews each article. We will ask questions about funding sources, timing, estimates, etc., and take a vote on each article. Our votes and rationales are then presented in the Finance Committee booklet that will be available for residents ahead of the annual town meeting. Process note is that our votes are recorded as yay, nay, and abstain in the booklet. For example, a vote that says 4-2-1 would mean 4 members voted to recommend, 2 members don't recommend, and 1 member abstained. Tonight, we will have public comment accepted for each of the designated groupings of the articles before the committee discusses each article. Article groupings have been made to allow for relevant public comment, and we will not be discussing or voting recommend or not recommend on the following articles: 1, 2, 4, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 22. And as such, there's no public comment on those articles at our meeting tonight. Again, even though there's no members of the public, we did set up that members of the public may address the Finance Committee for up to 2 minutes per grouping. This agenda segment will be limited to 10 minutes. We note that the comments must be relevant to the agenda item, and the chair may interrupt comments if they are not relevant to the agenda item. In this case, the comments must be relevant to the articles being discussed in each grouping. So, our grouping of articles are 3 and 5, and I think we can kind of take those, we can start through and just start at 3, since there's no public comment. So. Also, I made a note to myself, and then I forgot. I do want to call attention to something that's on the backside of the cover of our budget books that we received. Is an award that was the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award presented to the town of Newbury for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2023. This speaks to how even outsiders and this is from the Government Finance Officers Association, to show that we are extremely diligent and go above and beyond in our budgeting process. So I have high confidence in our process and our processes and those individuals within our town that we employ to help us with this. So thank you very much, Tracy, and to everyone on staff.
there a cash prize?
I wish.
Unfortunately, cash prize is not in the budget.
Do you see it anywhere?
All right, so starting with Article number 3, any discussion on Article 3, which is to fix the salaries and compensation of certain elective officers of the town? Any questions or?
Question? Any significant changes in any of these from last year?
No, no, the only ones that change are the town clerk and the tree warden, it's 2%, which you see across the board for all non-represented employees.
No raises for the select board? Come on. Gee. We need a motion.
Any discussion or motion to recommend?
We need a motion. Right. So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Questions? All those in favor of recommending, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None? Abstaining? Okay, so we are 700, recommend. All right, Article 4 is not one that the Finance Committee weighs in on. So on to biggie, Article 5, which is the appropriations for the operating budget. So entertain a motion to recommend.
Motion to recommend.
Okay.
All right, discussion, questions?
This is balance, right? Tracy?
It is.
Said was balance.
It is right now, yes.
And this includes, under the education portion, includes the full assessment for Triton,
Yes, as presented in their letter.
as presented in their letter, yes.
Is that the same number that was in the original
It
draft?
is not.
No,
It
I
is
thought
not.
it was changed. It was down, it's down about 300, maybe?
The Triton assessment number for Newbury this year is $12,022,797, which is an increase in our operating assessment of $799,872, or a 7.13% increase over last year.
And Essex and Whittier are sort of estimates within that. We haven't got final figures.
We just received Whittier's.
Okay,
It's about an $800 variance.
Okay.
So we'll have to adjust that since the warrant was already posted. And Essex Tech is just an estimate. We
Right.
don't get their numbers
I know.
until much later.
yeah, okay. Just so everybody knows.
Yep.
And Tracy, you said earlier it's a 2% increase for all non-represented
Yep.
employees?
Correct.
Okay. Any questions, concerns? I know that I've done a bunch of the looking through of the budget and the drafts earlier. Our debt service continues to go down at this point in time.
Madam Chair, it's worth mentioning too, is that debt service declines. What's happening, most of it is, well, I shouldn't say most of it, a good portion of it is debt excluded. And so the revenue goes away
Yeah,
as the debt declines, and whatever ability we had to issue debt within the confines of 2.5 is now gone. So anything that you're going to be looking at in the future for large expenditures, something, if we didn't have the ability to repair the HVAC system with free cash with available funds, you'd be looking at going out for debt exclusion override for that.
And looking at the percentage increases, they're all very modest in terms of public works increasing by 0.6%. Any questions or comments before we move ahead on a vote? All those voting to recommend? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Abstain? None, so 700, recommend. Okay. Moving right along, Article 6 is $100,000 to be added to the stabilization fund. This is in keeping with increases over the past few years. We keep this front and center because this is part of our savings account and this is $50,000 lower than last year. Tracy, what is the current balance of stabilization fund before the transfer?
$217,798.66.
All right. And do we have any, we don't have any articles to this year at ATM taking money from stabilization?
No, because there's so little funding in there.
So if we add $100,000 to this, the balance after it would be $317,798.66.
Correct.
All right. Entertain a motion so we can discuss.
so move.
Any questions?
You said it's 50,000 less this year.
We had appropriated $150,000 last year. There have been some years we put in more, but it's been declining as other operating expenses are taking up some of the money we've been putting into our savings. We're conscious of it, but it's happening.
Okay.
And it takes two-thirds in and two-thirds out. A vote, right?
Majority and
Oh, majority and
Majority and
two-thirds
two-thirds
out,
out.
that's right.
2/3 out.
Yeah.
it's
At
changed.
town meeting,
Yeah,
the vote.
that's what I mean.
When did that change? It's easier to put it in.
That had to be
Well,
6 years
it
ago.
always used to be 2/3 in, 2/3 out, and then under Deval Patrick it changed to simple in, 2/3 out, then it changed back
Oh, okay.
to
Yeah.
2/3 in, 2/3 out, and then under the Municipal Modernization Act, it changed back to simple in and 2/3 out.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
this year.
Next year, we might want it the other way.
So important to note that no one can spend that money other than town meeting.
Correct.
And the $100,000 will be coming from operating. Okay. Any questions? All those who would like to recommend?
Aye.
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 Not recommend? Abstain? Okay, recommend. Article 7 is sum of $200,000 to fund their OPEB liability, other post-employment benefits, of which this again is the same amount as last year, $200,000. Our trust fund balance is, I'm guessing, just over $1 million.
$186,011
Before this.
before.
So was that 1 million?
Yeah, be at 1.386 and we'll have it after this.
Yep. And right now, our obligation stands at about 6.3 million. But later on in the articles, you'll see that it's time for us to update it. We have to have a new actuarial valuation every couple of years. So this would be the year we'd be doing it.
Is there like a projected, or maybe this is what the actuarial does, but is there a projected like fat part of the ladder for,
There's a projected, like, we expect, I think, 2052 to be fully funded. But no, you just put in as much as
well,
you.
that'll be a perpetual like chase the dragon thing, that can't, because that will
It does,
change.
it has gone down in different years, depending on where interest rates are.
But does the actuary look at the average, let's say the average age of the
Oh,
person,
yeah.
and they say, all right,
That's
you're gonna have a
exactly-
big retirement,
That's exactly.
3 or 4 years. So have they mentioned as to when that heavy obligation time comes? The reason I'm asking, with $1 million, 1.3,
Oh, yeah.
and I mean, if
Understood.
you all of a sudden get a rash of retirees, then what?
We pay as we go
We
right
pay
now.
as we go, yeah.
Yeah, it comes out
Okay.
of, yeah, right.
Yeah.
But we're coming up with these arbitrary, maybe not arbitrary, but we're coming up with these numbers annually. The 200,000 is this, we're coming up with that number.
We're coming up with that number based on available resources.
Yeah.
So at some point in time, at a time once all of our facilities needs are addressed, all of our equipment needs are addressed, we're in a good position. As we certify our free cash, the expectation is you would move, $1 million into it. You would move much more money into it, but we had so many years of deferred maintenance to play catch up on. We basically spent the last 10 years trying to get ahead of the
So do we
deferred
have a
maintenance.
projected year where the x-axis of available funds and the y-axis of the reality of the number of retirees are likely to cross, and in which case, how does that work? Are you then assessed thereafter? I mean, it's no longer a willingness thing, it's a need thing.
So we're on pay-as-you-go, so if you look at our Essex Regional Retirement, we're assessed annually, and we pay as people retire. So it's not like any specific year, you're gonna have a bigger payment for your OPEB. The OPEB is just estimated, the actuaries determine the amount that we will owe over time. So this money gets put into a trust fund that we actually hire someone to manage it for us in the hopes of, bringing in better returns than what we could do ourselves here.
Are there any communities in Massachusetts that you know of that have fulfilled that obligation completely
As a matter of fact,
besides
West Newbury.
Besides West
Did that
Newbury?
before I left. Yeah, there are a few. I think Danvers is one of them,
Are they?
if I'm not mistaken, but there are a handful of them.
I mean, there are some communities that put hardly anything in.
Correct. I mean, as we have funds available,
Yeah.
my recommendation would be that we start moving larger
Yeah.
balances in. We just haven't quite gotten there yet.
Did you get a motion yet on that?
No, motion?
Nope.
So move.
Second.
Any other discussion or questions? All those who would like to recommend this article? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? 700 recommend. Article 8, to see if the town will vote to transfer or appropriate the sum of $80,000 from the receipts reserved cable PEG access special reserve fund for the support of PEG access service and programming.
You said 80, the paper says 85.
85.
85, sorry,
Okay.
85,000. Entertain a motion for us to discuss.
Yeah, I'll move it.
Second.
Awesome. All right, any questions, discussion?
What is this support? Is it the
This supports the,
cable television?
Cable.
All
Yep.
that? Yeah, all
The
that.
public, educational, and governmental, yep,
so,
programming
In town.
in town.
and this is close to in line with what was done last year. Last year it was 95,000, this year's 85 based on
Actuals.
actuals of what it costs to run that.
Yep.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I know Article 21 is going to be discussing the potential to revoke that. I don't know if that's something you want to do
Do we
now
wanna-
while they're here.
Yeah, do we want to, would everybody agree to, let's talk about
Sure.
Article
Yeah.
21 at the
Yeah.
same time? And we'll take, so entertain a motion to discuss Article 21.
Motion to
Yeah.
include Article 21 as pertinent to Article 8.
Excellent. So Article 21 is seeking to revoke the special revenue fund, known as the PEG Access Cable Related Fund, in which cable franchise fees and other cable-related revenues for appropriation to support PEG access services and oversight, and the renewal of the cable franchise agreement. Instead, this special reserve fund will cease as of fiscal year 2026, which begins on July 1, 2025, at which time the balance of the special revenue fund and any future cable franchise fees and cable-related revenue will be deposited into the general fund, which thereafter, by appropriation, support PEG access services and oversight and renewal of the cable franchise agreement or take any other action thereto. So, should we do a quick review of what 21 is asking us to do? And-
Sure.
yes.
So we established, there are two ways to account for it. You can just have these fees go directly into the general fund and establish a line item, just like we have DPW salary and wages, DPW expenses, you'd have PEG access programming, salary and wages, and expenses, et cetera. You'd have it right in your line item operating budget. At the time, we had a very active media committee, and we had a gentleman named Richard Hendrickson and a young man named Caleb Noble, who were interested in moving a 501c3 forward. So at that point in time, it made sense for us to petition town meeting to ask them, rather than account for it just in the general fund, that we would hold all those funds separate in a special revenue account, and it would be used for that purpose.
Could you clarify what time that was? Was that 2012?
I want to say 2016.
2015, 2016.
Yeah, I think 2016. So for all those years, those funds have been accumulating in that account. And the article that we had just discussed, Article 8, that's our annual appropriation to set the wages and expenses for the operation. You know, since that time, there has not been the formation of a 501c3, and I think we began talking about that back in 2011. So I didn't know if it made sense to continue holding those funds separately. Now, if you should revoke that status, if town meeting should vote to revoke that status, but there's a concern that, hey, this $900,000 that was meant for this kind of programming, we want to make sure that that funding stays committed for its intended purpose. Subsequent to this action, at June 30th, those funds would close to become a component of free cash, and you could appropriate it the next year. You could ask to have the exact same amount, $900,000 appropriated for PEG access programming, and it could only be expended for those legal purposes. But then the future fees would just go into the general fund and be part of our overall revenue picture.
So are there actually 3 options there? Is that what you're saying?
Two.
But isn't option 1, everything free cash done? Isn't option 2, everything free cash but earmarked or cordoned off for PEG access? Or option 3 is do nothing, but additional revenues go, so isn't that?
Technically, it could be 3, but the third option, part of the second option, if you revoke it, so option 2, you vote to revoke it, then in the next year, you would have to vote those funds from free cash in a special article, because they won't close out until June 30th, so April
Unless you
town
did something with
meeting.
them, you'd have to do that perpetually. You'd have to do that in perpetuity, annually, every year.
You just do it that 1 year, because the balance of the 900,000 is sitting in that account now. You could let it close to free cash, and then you could use it to, I don't know, to fund window replacements at the elementary school or something along those lines. There's nothing that says you have to use it for
Okay,
that,
so
but
it's not, totally not earmarked per se.
you could appropriate it for other legal municipal purposes, but.
Do you stay here, go here?
You can
sit down?
sit wherever
Just sit
wherever
back.
you're comfortable.
So, thank you, Madam Chair. For those of you I haven't met, Lisa Mead, Town Council. So the statute requires that if you close out the fund, the special revenue fund, that anything that's left in the fund goes back, reverts to the general fund, which is what Tracy is saying. So there's not a choice right now if you close it out. Once that becomes available when your budget is closed out at the end of June 30, 2025, then in next year's budget, as Tracy's saying, you can appropriate it, town meeting can appropriate it, that's the only way to use those funds, to an account that holds it for those purposes moving forward, if you want to count, but you don't have to. So certainly there is some, there's some discussion about, generally, not just here, about, well, is that the right thing to do? But when this was all set up in 2015, that it was clear that that's what had to happen and that's what DOR requires. So in 2015, the statute says you can set up an enterprise fund or special revenue fund if you want to fund like a 501c3 or a separate entity. You can do it in those 2 ways. Or you could just have it go to the general fund every year. You could just have done that from the beginning. But usually municipalities that want to establish a 501c, C3 will put it into an enterprise fund or put it into a special revenue fund. And then if it doesn't happen, it goes in and you appropriate the money every year to support your PEG access, however you need to do it in your annual budget.
Thank you.
What's the revenue side, annual?
Approximately 160 to 175,000 a year. It has declined slightly. Not as much as I thought it may, but I think the expectation as people move towards alternative streaming opportunities, that we would see it continue to decline.
But there should be some money coming from Verizon, because Verizon is lit.
No, so that's a stream, it's an internet.
That's internet, that's
That's
not.
an internet
Really? So
activity.
that's-
So, right, so this is a big
What's going on
dispute right now between Verizon, AT&T, Comcast, Warner Brothers, because they have to have licenses to come into communities, and then they have to pay these fees back to, of course, they don't pay them, they come from the subscribers that then go
Right.
back to the community. But Verizon comes in and they have a lot of places, Newburyport, parts of Newbury, and you replace with a fiber optic cable internet access, and you do streaming,
Yeah.
and you get rid of your cable and the $320 a month bill or whatever it is, right? And you replace it with your $45 bill. And they don't have to give any money of that to the local municipality. So there's a movement afoot between local carriers and actually a lot of attorneys that represent a lot of these 501c3s. I know this because I'm actually negotiating to communities right now about legislation that would change that. I don't know, that's gonna be a big battle that's way above all of our pay grade. So right now, those services are replacing cable services, which is why you're gonna slowly see those fees come down.
But Verizon they've laid infrastructure, that fiber was laid a dozen years ago.
Doesn't matter, they're streaming, it's internet access, it's not cable access.
Interesting. Which
Yeah,
essentially
Verizon-
all anyone uses Comcast for anyway, well, not anyone, but you're using it for internet access. Most people
Right.
don't have Comcast cable anymore. It's a really unlevel playing ground, but Verizon's got to work around and Comcast.
Right.
has it.
Verizon's
Huh.
installing, in your home,
Yeah.
through your phone.
Right,
Yeah?
right,
It's sitting there,
right.
you pay a little more and you get,
So that's legislative action, lobbying groups
Right.
and stuff like that. Right now, this money's coming in, you're gonna slowly see it go down, but not much. And while there is some discussion, certainly the cable licensing agreement requires the 5% or whatever it is on each bill to go towards supporting cable PEG access. You're doing that to the extent you can. There's a little discrepancy between that and the state statute, so you have to follow the state statute. So if you bring it in for PEG access, which is what you do, and then it's a little more than you need, okay, so you're still supporting PEG access, which is what you're required to do, and capital infrastructure, things like that. So if you were to take the $900,000 next year-ish, if that's what it is,
Yep.
and put it in, appropriate it for that in a line item to be used, moving forward, however you're gonna use it, infrastructure, capital, expansion, you'll have it there.
If we don't do anything, it just kicks it down the road to next year, right? There's no,
The money
We
would just
just-
keep.
it just still sits there and it doesn't.
It would keep building up because, as I see, you just said 160 to 175, yet our actual expenses on it are running about 85,000. So we do have a surplus.
Correct.
And I think one of the things that, I have two thoughts on this. One is that for a town of 6,000 people, we don't seem to have a strong need for a robust cable TV station and infrastructure and salaries and things to support that at this point in time. Haven't seen
At
a
least you,
need.
Alicia might address that, maybe.
Sure.
So, the history behind what the PEG Access channel is, or monies, the way it started is back in 2011, I was involved in the media committee. That's how I actually got involved in local government. And I strongly believe that sunshine kills mold. And at that time, there was no, the boards and committee meetings in the town of Newbury weren't being recorded, weren't being broadcast. We had nothing. So unless you were able to come in and watch a meeting, you didn't know what was happening. I worked hard with the media committee, and in 2015, I ran from a seat on the board, and I left the media committee, and I came onto the select board. But it was always our hope, as a media committee, and when I got on the board, that a 501c3 model would sprout up in town and grow, similar to the Salisbury model. I know you've received some correspondence that quite frankly is inaccurate, and that's one of the reasons why I'm here tonight, is to try to set the record straight. Back in July, let's see, the history here. So back in I have meeting minutes here from November 9th, 2011. One of the first meetings that I attended as a media committee, we wanted to complete the programming in phases. Phase 1 was government access at Town Hall, and Phase 2 was expansion to include community programming. So we did have somewhat of an active media committee. We had this gentleman, Richard Hendrickson, who has since moved away from town, that was instrumental working with Tracy to purchase all the equipment to get our public access. Government, at least the government keeps running. Richard moved. The last time that we appointed a media committee, any members on the media committee, was on our May 28th, 2019. It was July 23rd, sorry, I'm out of order here. That's not it either. July 24th, 2018. We did our fiscal year 19 appointments. A motion was made by Selectman Jesperson, seconded by Selectman Walker, and voted unanimously to appoint Robin Williams and Joe McDonough to the Media Committee for that year. Mr. McDonough didn't take his appointment, never signed the book, and the committee therefore was never formed. One person does not a committee make. So, since we did not have a media committee, I went back to look at our select board meeting notes again, meeting minutes. And back in May 28th of 2019, we had a discussion about a media committee as a board. And if you just let me read this to you really quick, this is right from the records. Selectwoman Greco proposed the idea of forming a media committee of residents that would serve as an autonomous committee and not as a branch or extension of the town's government. The committee would advise the Board of Selectmen, hire consultants, and advise the public access content for programming for the town of Newbury. She proposed a part-time employee be hired to work with Triton School District to schedule Newbury's education channel, to reach out to other schools such as Whittier and Essex North Shore, which serve the Triton District, to have school committee meetings be aired. The media committee should continue to implement all board and committee meetings of Newbury be recorded and aired on the public access station as charged by the selectmen. Then I read the current charge of the media committee. Select person Jesperson suggested adding to the charge to assist all government functions in broadcasting and recording their meetings. Then Selectman Walker noted the current language of the charge allows a media committee to include and coordinate public programming. He stated it's asking a lot for a committee to hire a town employee. Selectwoman Greco stated the person would not be a town employee but a consultant. Mr. Walker suggested starting a 501c3 as other towns do, which may offer the autonomy A. Greco desires. He noted Salisbury's model is working well. A. Greco replied that currently the town has no city media committee or cable advisory committee, and that was a concern to me. Jeff Walker noted that the town has an employee, a production operations specialist that has oversight to programming and production. If the goal of what A. Greco is proposing is different, that needs to be thoroughly fleshed out. A. Greco replied that she would like to reach out to Lance Wisniewski, I believe is how you say it, of Salisbury Community TV and Media Center, and ask him to consult with the selectmen about the process and what they have in Salisbury. Both A. Greco and M. Doyle reiterated that all meetings held by the town should be recorded and aired, and they are not. J.R. Colby noted the transparency initiative and community outreach policy implemented by the selectmen on February 28, 2017, requiring that all board and committee meetings be recorded and broadcasted, and remarked that the policy currently isn't being followed by 3 boards and committees. So that was back in May of 2019 was when we held that discussion. And we put a call out for a media committee, and they just haven't come. Then again on,
Felicia, question?
yeah,
Would you categorize your initial charter, let's say, of what it is you wanted to do? If you were to look at it today from above, would you categorize that as having been completed?
no, I wanted a robust 501c3 similar to the Salisbury model.
Well, but wasn't the charter for the robust 501c3 Salisbury to make sure that all of our meetings and everything were televised and accessible to anyone who wanted to watch them even if they couldn't be here physically.
That
Was
piece,
that-
that piece was met. I would prefer to have them all live streamed, like now they're recorded
Mm.
and then uploaded later. I mean, if we had, like, I don't know, if you ever go to Salisbury, when there's a meeting there, someone shows up in their room, turns it on, and it's aired live
Mm.
over the cable TV.
Mm.
That was kind of my hope.
Okay.
But without volunteers, it just never grew up. On July 23rd of 2019, we had Lance of Salisbury Community TV Media Center located in Salisbury Town Hall come to the select board, and he explained a discussion in the history of the formation of the nonprofit. Discussion included what he felt were the benefits of operating an independent PEG and answering questions proposed by the board. Then we had Michael Ridinger, which is a director, who is the director of engineering of Unique Media Systems in Boylston, Mass. And that's a company responsible for the construction of cable facilities in numerous towns and cities throughout New England. Explained and discussed the pros and cons of the operation of an independent nonprofit PEG Access Center and a PEG Access Center operated by a municipality. Discussion again included. So we looked at the 501c3 model and we looked at the municipal model. And still, since the monies was held aside in the special revenue fund, the hope was always that there would be people volunteering. We put a call out occasionally, but it just never grew. So at this point, I think the municipal, having it a municipal model, having the line come into our operating budget, honestly, I think it gives it a better chance of taking off and growing. I think that's just my opinion.
Yeah, there's no reason, I'm sorry, go ahead. No.
Do you think there is still an appetite on the part of the Board of Selectmen to do that,
What's that?
to fulfill the vision as you have just portrayed?
Hire a consultant.
In other words, if we move 900,000 into free cash, can we expect that there may be a recommendation from the Board of Selectmen to use those funds to do exactly what some of those funds?
To create a 501c3?
We don't get,
Or
A
no,
municipal model, so that
the
you.
municipal
so
model,
we
just
do-
Yeah.
operate it,
I do.
yeah.
I think that
All right,
if,
it's just,
yeah,
you know.
I do. I
Because it
think
feels like
that,
a circular argument, like, we don't have enough money
Right.
to do this, but we want, like, but we need, yeah, it's just, it's like a.
Well, I think there's two different things. So the 501c3 model doesn't put the burden on the municipality, right? There's an independent body that does it. It's funded through an enterprise fund. And you're funded, but you're not, they have to report to you, you have a contract with them, they have to report to you, you have to give an annual budget and all of those things, but they are responsible for operating it and growing it, right? So that's the 501c3 model. The municipal model is it becomes a department of the
Yeah.
town, which is a whole different
right.
bailiwick, right? And so I think that those are the two, from a management perspective, that's an issue that y'all need to talk about, but those are the two.
Sure.
But aren't we already there?
yes.
I mean, we're already
Kind
there.
of are.
We
That's how
have
we're
a municipal
operating
model.
now.
We're already-
Right.
You've already achieved more than half of the heavy lifting that you wanted to achieve that.
Correct,
Part of which
Yeah.
was just by sheer virtue of accessibility of technology.
correct.
Right.
You know, you don't need, when this was first conceived, 2011, 2012, it's a much bigger undertaking
Yes.
than it is
Head end.
today. Now you can make it,
Yeah, we had the head end brought in and everything,
now you
yeah.
can make it part of the, I think you call him the IT director,
Mhm.
the IT director's job.
Mm-hmm.
And it's more a line item of his or her responsibility for her job, and I guess from listening to that's why I asked you about the goals. I mean, whatever the objectives of the 501c3 are, pretty close. Just going from a recorded model to a live model wouldn't be too big a deal. And there doesn't seem to be, I'm not familiar with Salisbury's, whatever they broadcast in terms of other material, other content, but
Yeah, they have
There.
Salisbury Talks, they come in and you have
Yeah.
people, they might do a cooking show, that kind of stuff.
yeah.
Currently, we do run a municipal model, because if we didn't have that, we would have nothing.
Yeah.
So, all this is doing, we're asking you to do what's before you is just to make the accounting look like it does, which is what it really is.
Yeah.
Which is
Right, and it
reasonable.
sounds like there's maybe a misunderstanding with the public about that, but also that it would effectively be, as you're saying, the same if we appropriate it the next year. And like, there seems like there's just a lack of awareness, I guess, of that, or misunderstanding of that.
You got 900,000 to start up, whatever.
Right.
And then you got 160 to 170,000 to operate it annually, if that's.
I can't think of anything that would cost you 900K.
Right.
No, I don't know, I don't think it would.
No, I just can't.
I'm just saying, if, no, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
This is very live.
Yes.
it's futuristic.
But I mean, it's anything.
And I'll be honest with you, I attend MMA meetings, and one of the last meeting we just had, they were discussing, there was a senator, I forget what city she was from, they have a proposed legislation up to put a tax, and you might be aware of this, the tax, digital, like Hulu and Netflix, digital streaming, and have that money directed to cable
Yeah, so this is the legislative.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's all the streaming services.
Yeah, all the streaming services, because there's some communities that have vibrant PEG access, you know, Boston is one, Newburyport's one, I think Melrose is one. They have, and they are slowly losing their money, and so it's gonna come back to the municipality.
Ability to support an operation that,
Right.
It's also an issue of control, you have control, right?
Yeah.
You do here now.
Yeah.
So anyways, that's why, thank you, Madam Chair, for putting me on the agenda. I just wanted to explain where we were, why we're here today.
To
Yes.
Frank's point, the live access, that's sort of the last big hurdle, or is there something more than that?
You need body, you need help to come in. Now, one thing that we did do also was, we have an arrangement, and Tracy can speak to this, with Triton to have an internship for 2 students to come and actually do that kind of stuff, if they're interested in doing video programming.
A paid internship.
It's a paid internship out of these big access funds to do some of these live recordings, and we don't have anybody to do that.
To Frank's point about the technology too, I mean, and this is the limited amount of experience I have with any of this is at Triton. And in the last, since I started calling games at Triton in 2016 maybe, we went from the games are recorded and uploaded onto YouTube to they're live now, which is frightening when you're calling a game. But that jump was gradual, but it wasn't. It could not have cost $900,000. You would have noticed that, I think, in the Triton's budget had it in there. So whatever the technology is, I haven't the slightest idea, that takes you from this to live cannot be that difficult, and that program has become huge at Triton now. So there's give them the opportunity to bring students in for that, and I think they would jump out.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of students now that are, I mean, they broadcast almost every single, they live broadcast almost every single sporting event now.
How many people are involved over there?
It's, I mean, it takes 2 or 3 camera people per, if it's like a basketball game or a volleyball game or football, it takes 2 or 3 people working the cameras and somebody running the, you know, being the director, and then depending on how many people you want commentating in the booth. So it could be a crew of 6 or 7 kids for a game, or a skeleton crew of like 2 or 3.
The quality of filming on these now.
Most of it is an iPhone on a tripod for cameras.
And it would be more like one person here.
Yeah.
There's no need to circulate cameras around the room or what have you. It would be just one person turning it on.
The equipment is important, the quality of the equipment.
yes.
And you'll have plenty of money to upgrade equipment.
It's just how much do you want to invest in a
Yeah, that would be my,
facility, and there were
Yeah.
a lot of
I
questions.
think it's already done.
Yep.
I think you're already there.
Well,
Yeah.
It's just a matter of live making it. Yeah, it's pretty good.
We're there as far as we can be in rented space.
in rented space, that's the other piece, is that investment in a more fun.
Right around the time the OPEB's funded, you'll have a new town hall.
There you go. I do want to, so we did have 2 letters from Jack Rybicki and one from Jerry Heavey. Jerry Heavey's didn't really have a question, it just said that her late husband was interested in this, and had some of her own opinions. but there's no question in her letter.
There was an allegation in her letter about us, the contract requiring a media committee. That's not true.
Yes.
No, there's the cable advisory committee that has to be put together, but they only have to be put together during the renegotiation of the license. So the cable advisory committee is not an ongoing committee. It is a committee that is
Set up for-
coterminous with the negotiation of the license.
So when that comes up again,
Correct.
there will be another committee. So we
Correct.
are not in any violation
No.
of committee. Good. The other question, or somewhat rambling question, I could figure out from this letter is, the first one was, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, the first one. The first one is, asking if our town leaders or town council have reviewed the matter as laid out. For this is a legitimate citizen concern and reason for calling for such oversight of review of law as it applies to funding maneuvers as proposed by leadership. I think that's asking, has town council looked at this?
Yes, town council has
Thank
looked at it closely, reviewed all the IGRs on it, which are the governmental bulletins from the Department of Revenue, as well as the statutes, and the town is proposing to do it exactly the way the statute requires and DOR requires.
Excellent. And point of clarification, the language is this, is that it's in support of public educational or governmental access cable television services, not dedicated to public education and government, which are nouns when they're used. The argument here, I believe, is that we can only use this for public, we can use this for public education and government, and I believe it's a misreading of where they are used as adjectives. To be in support of public, educational, or governmental access cable television services. There's a misunderstanding that PEG means that it can be used for public education and government.
No, only for access, correct. Adjectives on the access through the cable, correct.
Got it.
That was good.
So what we are doing is fully compliant with the law. What is being proposed here is fully compliant with the law as a method, because this has been established for more than 3 years.
Correct.
The town meeting body which established this can now vote to revoke it.
Unestablish
Unestablish it.
it. And the law requires that the money that's left go into the general fund,
Okay.
period. That's not even a question.
I think we had a motion and a second already. I think we-
Yes, which one would we like to vote on first? So,
8 and 20.
8, then 21?
Yep.
All those in favor of recommending Article 8?
I don't
say-
see that you had a motion.
Oh, do we?
Oh.
Okay,
So moved.
Yep.
Number 8.
motion on 8, okay.
Joe was second.
Second.
All those in favor of recommending Article 8, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? 0. So 7-0-0 to recommend on Article 8. I would entertain a motion on Article 21 as well.
Motion, so moved.
Second?
Second.
Any further discussion or thoughts? All those who would like to recommend Article 21, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? None. Abstaining? None. 7-0-0 to recommend Article 21. moving on, here we go. Article 9, entertain a motion to recommend the following enterprise revolving funds. Recreation revolving fund and municipal waterways improvement and maintenance fund.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
any discussion?
Pretty picture.
Entertain a motion to, all those in favor to
Aye.
recommend?
Aye.
Yeah.
Opposed? Abstain, 0. So 700 recommend. Article 10 is raise and appropriate transfer from available sums to operate the ambulance enterprise. 331,209. Motion.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion, questions?
Self-funding.
Self-funding every year, this is based on the actuals, Tracy?
That's correct.
So, and then the overflow gets closed out to their enterprise free cash, which then gets used for,
Ambulance purchases, equipment purchases, you'll see some further on.
further on. All those who would like to recommend, aye? Aye. Oppose or not recommend? Abstain, 0. 700 recommend. Okay, so Article 11 and 12 go together. This is, Article 11 is giving, and I don't think we have, can't remember if I think we have to recommend on this one or not. This allows the select board to enter into a lease purchasing financing agreement to allow for Article 12 to be executed, correct? And Article 12 is to use to recommend the town vote to transfer from the ambulance free cash, enterprise free cash, the sum of 146,046 to fund the lease of a fully equipped ambulance and to purchase a power load stretcher. I'd entertain a motion to recommend both.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor of recommending both Articles 11 and 12, say aye.
Aye.
7. Opposed? None. Abstain? None. 700 recommend. All right. Article 13. To vote to transfer for the sum free cash for of $2,217,499 for specific purposes outlined below. These are written in the warrant. Fire station floor replacement, I'm not going to go through and read all of these. They are written out in the warrant. Entertain a motion to recommend. So we can have discussion.
So moved. Second.
Were these not to exceed numbers on some of them? Is that how they're put up?
Yep. They're all not to exceed.
Okay.
Yeah.
We don't actually think it's gonna cost $100,000 to put a roof on
I was gonna say.
lower grade
Um,
school.
That looked
Based
kinda
on
high
the
to me.
estimates, so that it's
shingles.
going to be either wooden or, at our recommendation, we prefer to see it, it's a plastic material, but it's architecturally significant to that time. And based on the estimates, we expect, we'll have to go out to bid naturally, but these are the estimates that we received. Yep. And that's not even understanding what's underneath it structurally, if there's any repairs necessary.
Frank, you and I could do it.
I was gonna say. My son had put in a bid.
Public construction.
Yeah.
All right. So as a point of order on this, Marshall, do you want to just kind of talk us through how these items were identified and how the dollar amounts were
Well,
in a general sense, or?
yep, a lot of these things, well, these all, if they're capital, came before the capital planning committee. And we had the representatives from DPW, police, and the fire department come and speak to us on each one of these. There's been a little bit of change between what they presented and what you're getting right now. And Frank, exactly the same thing. That little roof, $100,000. But they explained that they did not want to do something that was going to be modern. They wanted to do something that was going to be period, and they were going to look for a composite that would last a long time. I had some experience with those composites, and they really are good, and they do last a very long time. If you want to go through each one bit by bit, I can do that. But we do have some significant pieces that are probably the highlights. The Newbury Elementary School HVAC system is one of them. That is going to be spread over 2 years at about $1 million a year. We went back and said, well, if we're doing something that's a hybrid system, in other words, using natural gas and using the atmosphere for heating and cooling, could we do the whole thing with the geothermal system? Turns out, they went back and looked at it, the geothermal system would cost about 4 times as much. It just doesn't pay.
That's about $7 to $8 million for geothermal.
Yeah, it just doesn't pay. Although in looking at this and looking at the repairs to the roof, one of the things that came up is the age of this building. And the building is actually looking to be in pretty good shape, and it's 74 years old. So they do last if you do take care of them.
Which building are you,
Pardon?
which building are you talking
Newbury
about?
Elementary School.
Newbury
The
Elementary.
Elementary.
round school part.
Yes, around school park, right, yeah.
Yeah,
Stuff has been added since then.
I was gonna say, I was there not quite 70 years ago.
I actually read about the building of that school. It was so interesting that it was carried in the New York Times as a very innovative school at the time. And let's see, we've got library roof. That will be a metal roof, which would give us a lot of life on that particular building, but that is $650,000.
And that's a one-time, that's not spread over years?
No.
That's a one and done?
one-time.
Okay.
Is the HVAC system the only one on this list that's?
Pardon?
Is the Newbury, is the NES HVAC the only one that would be spread over multiple years?
No, Newbury HVAC is 2 years. We've been having the elementary school roof go for several years, and it's got 3 more years to go for completion. So that has been a pretty significant outlay to do that roof.
And just because I know it has been, there's been some talk that people think that the library, the elementary school roof replacement is being done by a roofing company.
Yes,
Yes.
Correct, yes.
yeah.
There have been some,
Frank is not
Questions?
doing that one.
No.
that is, it is not being done by our own DPW. That is being done by a roofing contractor that we've
Correct.
worked with, yes. Okay, thank you.
That's also going according to that original schedule, that
Yes.
original like 10 or 12 year
Yep.
plan, right? It's just
Yes.
that
Yep.
obviously the numbers get
Yeah, we
bigger
did,
every year.
we did building envelope studies
Yeah.
quite a few years ago. And that identified a lot of things that had to be done on different buildings in the town, and Newbury Elementary was one of them. The other things that are significant, fire department is looking to replace engine 9. That also came out of a study that was done several years ago on the equipment that we have in the fire department. A lot of that is older equipment. I can tell you that some of that old equipment did in fact break down on the way to fires. So while they have kept it up as well as they can, it gets to a certain point where it needs to be replaced. Any other, the police department cruiser is a standard, almost like a standard entry, we do one a year.
And that's in the
Just for-
operating budget?
Well, this
Right.
year, actually, we do replace one a year, and they're generally on a 3-year rotation. That we had an accident in January during the floods, so that vehicle is gonna be replaced completely by our insurance company. It was totaled with a new
Oh.
vehicle, so you won't see it on this year's
Oh,
warrant.
Okay.
But normally, yes, every year.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. And then there was one other thing, there were tasers for the police department, but they are looking for a grant for that,
They
and so we
received
held
it.
it up.
They got it.
They did?
Excellent.
Okay.
And I know the one that came up last year is the Morgan Ave Fire Station floor replacement at
Yes.
60,000, and that seems to be a realistic estimate on that.
It's, well, when we got it, it was 25 to 50, depending on what they found underneath the floor, which is always, you know,
Okay.
we're doing some of that in our company now. When you dig underneath, that's where all the trouble starts. You find things that you never would have guessed. And so, you know, we're doing some, we found 2 tanks. Whoever put those there?
They don't have to raise the roof.
I want a building like that. A lot of room.
So I'm sorry I don't know this, but what's the number in the parentheses at the end of each one of the?
Okay, the number in parentheses, there is a voting system that is in the capital planning committee bylaw for Newbury, which indicates, is it a replacement, is it something new, is it going to increase, decrease costs, things like that. So we give it a rating. And that's, so if you were looking at this and saying which ones are most important, the higher numbers would be the most critical ratings, the lower numbers less critical.
And is there a ceiling to those numbers, like 50?
50.
Okay.
50.
All right. Thanks.
And it's not unusual to see those items that are related to public safety or public health jump
Yeah.
pretty quickly up into the higher ratings.
I just have a question that's not for Marshall, but for maybe Lisa, but I know in the past, unpaid bills require 4/5 majority. As part of this, is it still a simple majority?
If it's an unpaid bill, it's a 4/5 majority, but how is it in the warrant? Yeah, so that unpaid bill is a 4/5 majority, right?
Okay.
So,
That's not the salt bill, is it? That's not salt bill in here.
So
No.
what,
There was a
should we have to pull it
advertising
up,
for a
shall we
job
pull it out of
posting.
there?
Oh,
It's part of Article 13, right?
Right.
yeah, you might wanna move that second, right, cause then you would jeopardize the,
Move it separately.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I have 2 motions under that
Yeah,
article.
2 motions,
Okay.
okay, all right.
And we can just say it's because of the difference in the vote.
Okay.
For special town meeting, it'd be 9/10.
Marcia, what's the wait time to get a fire engine now?
Couple of years.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And we don't have a fire engine on this year's,
We do.
we do?
we do.
4/5.
Yeah, it's funded in the operating.
In the
budget.
operating budget, okay, so it's not in this article. Okay.
Did you pay the salt bill?
It's not a salt bill,
Huh?
it's a job.
No, we had this, the salt vendor was like hung out to dry for years, we didn't wait for
I
this.
think they waited 2.5 years.
So we don't do business with municipalities.
For years it was the trees. It was
Yes.
always the tree warden bill for years.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
Alright. Any other questions or discussion about any of these items? All those in favor of recommending Article 13? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? 0. So 700 recommend. Okay, next up, Article 14, which we have Martha and Kristen here to talk about the MBTA Communities Multifamily Overlay District. One of the reasons that we are considering this does not involve an expenditure or an appropriation, yet through discussions with my voice of wisdom over here, Jane, who has guided us through many votes and on these recommendations, is that there is a financial component to this, in which case we want to weigh in and discuss it. So I will entertain a motion to recommend or not recommend, so that we can discuss and then also include.
So moved.
Second, excellent. So Martha and Kristen, I know you have had a number of public hearings and you've come and sat before us as well, and I understand that there are a few information or question and answer sessions planned between now and town meeting for voters and residents to come in. I think in my view on this one is that the reason that I believe that we have a role to recommend or not recommend on this is that there is two financial implications. One being that if we are in non-compliance, we would be losing out on grant money that historically was about 1.7 million over the past 10 years. And those are grants for not just discretionary or nice to haves, they are grants for things that we need to have. And when we deal with such a tight budget, any sort of grant funding is duly appreciated, such as for the tasers. Second piece of it is if we are not in compliance by December 31st of 2025, we can be facing litigation or legal action, in which case we're going to be spending some money, I think, with legal fees. So I think in that case we are duty bound to have, I feel it's my duty to look out for the town's money overall, that we should be in compliance with this. So that's where I'm at, is that we should come into compliance, and I'm open to discussions from anyone or questions that people may have.
I think there's an additional financial implication which is not as easily quantified in the immediate term. And that is when you read the verbiage behind why we've been given this ultimatum, which is what it is. You know, it's that we all need to do our part with the housing crisis in this state that's facing this state, and towns that have a commuter rail through them have a responsibility to do some sort of initiative like this. And one of the things that caught me in the verbiage was, you know, it should be to encourage housing children, what have you. And so while it is more difficult to quantify and it requires a longer term view, I do not see where, you know, I as a taxpayer in this town, I don't have a housing crisis. I have a Triton falling apart crisis. I have an elementary school that needs work crisis. I have a teachers in positions being cut crisis. I have a very lightly funded OPEB crisis. I have other things that to me take priority. And if you say to me that, hey, you have to build housing that encourages children and everything else, great. Our average cost to educate now is up to, is it 16.8, 17.3, whatever that is. These units are gonna pay, let's use a conservative estimate, $2,000, $2,500 in property tax annually maybe. So that means I need 9 units to cover the cost of one head in the schools in property tax. That's not even account for all the other services, police, fire, everything else. I believe that to be compliant with the ultimatum that the state has given you is an economic catastrophe further down the road. So yes, maybe I'm forced to buy my own tasers, maybe I'm forced to do whatever. I just don't see where, and granted, there are a ton of ifs that happen between now and then. But I don't see where that makes fiscal sense for this town down the road. Or I see it as a significant potential liability. So while I do absolutely agree with the points that you have made about the repercussions of not falling in line with the ultimatum, this town has not done well in falling in line with what the state wanted to do, see Chapter 70 funds. I just don't see where, this isn't even offering you anything for taking on this economic burden. This is just saying, we're gonna take away what little of your money we give you back. And I don't know what the answer to that is, but if we do take a moment to look a few steps down the road, I don't see whereas being able to keep what few grants that we get, 1.7 over 10 years, balances out fiscally. And I'm absolutely open to hearing why this won't happen or why I'm wrong, but that's just what I come up with from having read the pro argument.
I think if I'm recalling this correctly, Martha, you addressed some of those issues with respect to the long-term potential impact financially, with respect to the work that was done by Merrimack Valley Planning.
With respect to impact on schools, and
Yeah,
those kinds of questions,
yeah.
right? I mean, historically, based on the data that we've received from Merrimack Valley Planning Commission, the impact on schools is minimal. I don't have any data to back that up, but that's, historically that seems to be the case, impact on schools, impact on transportation and other things that people often,
When you say historically, what examples are they citing?
I say,
I can speak to this a little bit, just to put some things in context, so you can make a decision on that. So first of all, the requirement to adopt Section 3A and MBTA zoning is a requirement to adopt zoning, not to create
Right.
housing. So let's be clear about that.
Sure.
And the town of Newbury, in your particular instance, has zones that are created, but frankly, don't have the infrastructure to support them. So you're gonna create zoning, which frankly, people aren't gonna be able to build because you can't get the infrastructure, right? So that's just a fact of some of these more rural communities that have to adopt the zoning.
Okay.
So that's the first thing. You're not building building housing, you're
Right.
creating zoning to allow a developer who's gonna look at the numbers to decide whether they're gonna build in Newbury or in Newburyport or in Salisbury where they have services, all right? The second thing is that there's a long history of studies related to 40B developments of multifamily housing. And the reality is that families with children, even though the statute is clear that you can't make it age restricted and they have to be appropriate for families with children, which means they have to be at least 2 bedrooms, okay? And you can't restrict families with children, is that families don't move into these multifamily housing areas when they will when they're younger, before school, but once the kids start to grow, the areas aren't appropriate for those families to raise their kids. And so the impact, their studies, RKG is one of the big analyst companies that has looked at this, and I've sat with boards doing 40Bs all over the state, and the studies come back the same every single time. And that's actually based upon real information. And there was actually the Commonwealth Magazine, and Harvard did a study, and MIT did a study about 10 years ago. Same thing. They don't bring in a lot of families with children. It's just the nature of the development. And because these developments have to be multifamily developments, and some are more dense than others, right? So if you have, a row of three units that are townhomes, yeah, those are more likely to have kids than, for instance, a 3-story, 25-unit or 50-unit building. It's just, that's what the studies say. And that's what they bear out, because they're not just predictions, they're based upon what has actually happened, because they have the information. So that's where that information comes from.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So Milton voted it down, so did they vote the zone proposal, or did they vote, we don't want it?
So Milton is different, and it's a really interesting thing, and it's too bad that Milton happened first, because Milton is different than most any other community in Massachusetts. Milton has a representative town meeting. The town meeting voted to adopt the zoning, but they have a charter provision that allows the electorate to overturn a zoning article adopted by town meeting. And that is what's being challenged, because the town meeting did what it was supposed to do. The electorate then overturned the town meeting. So the action against Milton is related to the electorate vote overturning the town meeting, which is different than what state statute allows, and the request for injunctive relief to require the building inspector to issue permits should they come to them. So it's much different than the Attorney General coming and saying to town meeting in Newbury or in Rowley, you must adopt this zoning. The Attorney General can't do that. The statute says adopt the zoning. If you don't adopt the zoning, you're going to have a financial penalty. That's what the statute says. The legislative body is going to do what the legislative body does, and the ramifications will fall where they are. Milton is a much different animal, and it's, a lot of people are waiting to see what happens in Milton, but it's not going to be applicable to 99% of the communities in Massachusetts that have to comply with this.
It won't be applicable to Newbury.
It won't be applicable to Newbury.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah.
Where do we stand with respect to, our requirement for affordable housing?
Subsidized housing.
Subsidized, yeah.
Right. Based on the 2010 census, it was 3.1%, we're required to be at 10. I don't know that it's actually been calculated.
Yeah, the 2020, I can look it up for you in a minute, but it's gone up a little bit because what's its name was approved. Right, the 40B on Pearson's Way was approved.
Right, that was 6 units we've added to our inventory.
But you're still well.
We're still not at 10%.
No.
And
Which we would accomplish, how much of that requirement would we accomplish?
10%
Not by the vote.
It's 10%.
The vote just makes
10%.
it available.
If it's built,
It's gonna be
10%
built, yeah.
of what's built
But it
will
would-
be, so you're not gonna get, so you'll basically stay even with those new units.
Yeah,
Look, these little computers that we have, right? So Newbury is at, as of the 2020 census, Newbury's at 3.45%.
There's a chance that this zoning could pass and nothing get built.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Right,
absolutely.
Right.
Because it's still,
Yeah,
at least
there's-
yeah, it's just, it's a zoning, not a
Right.
build. And number two, they still would have to go through making sure the feasibility and all the other pieces
Right.
fall into place.
Right.
Water, sewer,
Yeah,
Title
Right.
V's
Yeah.
in those areas, like,
it's not to say that it wouldn't be built, like, I wanna be clear, but it's not, you're not actually, the zone doesn't exist right by the train station, there's too much wetlands, right? So it's not there, so now you're over the bridge.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I think one of the zones we looked at is next to the round school, correct?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Next to
We've
the
got,
road.
you've got water to the round school, you have to extend another however many
You have to get
feet.
permission from the city of Newburyport.
To do
Right.
Newburyport, yeah. And they have to pay for the tie-in themselves.
Yes.
It's not imminent.
Oh, no, not at all,
No,
not at all,
no.
I just don't, you know, not to sound like an idealist or what have you, it's just that, well, probably my natural response to having a gun held to my head for anything is, go to hell. But I don't want to gamble on our inaccessibility to services,
Yeah.
to have what ultimately could become a really significant financial burden on the town.
I just want to add one other thing. So one of the biggest pots of money, the grant money, is MassWorks money, which you haven't used, historically haven't used if you've only gotten about $1 million. But MassWorks money goes to public infrastructure for economic development. And so if the town wanted, and it's a significant amount of money. I know I'm working with a town right now with over 3 years, they're getting $10.5 million a year, right? So depending on where you are and what you want to do, if there's something happened that you wanted to use MassWorks money, that would not be available. So it's not just necessarily, and again, I'm trying to paint the whole picture so you have all the facts. It's not just necessarily the money that you have received in the past, it's what you're going to give up in the future.
Any other questions or further discussion? So, with that, I'll take, please raise your hand or say aye if you want to recommend.
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed.
Abstain? 0, 6, 1, 0. Vote to recommend, so 6 recommend, 1 no, 1, 0 abstain. Thank you, Lisa.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Nice to see all of you.
Aye.
Alright, we are not weighing in on 15, or 16, or 17, or 18, or 19. Last one is Article 20, which is to vote to dismantle an existing Newbury Improvement Trust voted at town meeting on October 25th, 2005. And then remaining assets be transferred to the town and held by the select board for such purposes they were received by the trust. And Tracy, can you remind us the approximate amount of this trust is about $4,000?
$4,000.
Okay.
So moved. Seconds.
Discuss. The family that originally supported this trust is in favor of this article?
They brought it to us.
They brought it to us?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Vote to recommend?
Aye.
Oppose? 0. Abstain, 0. 700 to recommend. And we already discussed 21, and we do not comment on 22. Nice job. Tracy, thank you. We will work on the booklet. I will write the letter and put it forth to the board here. The only other remaining items on our agenda, that was a quick. Under old business, new business, I did want to report back from the District Communications Committee meeting that was held last week. At that meeting, which Mr. Walker was there as well, there was a lively discussion regarding the this year's budget cycle and a feeling of a little bit of push and pull with the budget and where we ended up between the three towns. And there was a movement made to reinvigorate the alternative assessment committee with a slightly different charter this time. The last time the alternative assessment committee was, which Alicia and I were both part of, it was to create a kind of circuit breaker type, in case of emergency type of assessment. And after many days and modelings of different ways, we agreed that there was we couldn't find one that was palatable to all three communities to even bring forward to the committee because of the way that the two-step formula works. At the meeting, the DCC meeting, it's talking about how about looking at a simple alternative assessment based on a 5-year rolling average on enrollment. So instead of a two-step formula, doing something that is totally just based on percentage enrollment of the students based over 5 years. So a working group was established. Select board member Leslie Matthews was in attendance and was in support of this, so I asked her to join me as a representative, and she will be sitting on that with, I believe, Ronnie Lee from Salisbury, and I don't remember who the Rowley people are.
Chris Leland and
Chris, yes.
Sherry.
The first meeting of that will be held on April 18th, and if Patrick or Richard, if anyone else wants to serve, I kind of got stuck volunteering myself, and then because I'm a bit of a geek with numbers and visualizations, I've already created a working document on what a 5-year rolling average would look like, so we have some working sessions to talk about. The big thing we do know, and I think is really important for anything to address, any alternative assessment is not going to address our overall funding, where our state portion is not, it's just not, it does not keep up with inflation, does not keep up with the operating budget and changing needs. So that's not going to be solved by it, but maybe there's a way that the three towns could think of a different way. So there is a working group established for that, and we'll be meeting later in April, and we're going to have more fun with formulas. If anyone has any questions, or
So let me know and
I will let you know. It's
The rolling average is not new to Triton.
It's-
We had a rolling average for a long time.
It's an interesting proposal. Has pros and cons. It would allow us to project, it would allow us to know things earlier.
It eliminates this kind of thing.
Yeah, is what we saw this year, where our minimum local contribution saw a stark escalation. 2 years ago, it was Rowley that saw an escalation of their minimum local contribution coupled with an enrollment gap, an enrollment jump, so they got a double whammy. The problem, I think, my own opinion, is a zero-sum game. There's the same amount of money, and every year it's going to be two towns, one or two towns are going to see more or less one town, so it's always going to be a two.
Unless you can step on a nickel and let it spit out 2 dimes, I don't see how it just going well.
And in Newbury's case this year, it wasn't enrollments that were driving it,
No.
so we wouldn't have seen any relief anyway,
Right.
No.
even if we had a rolling average.
Right.
But generally, the rolling average over years, you go back and look, you'll see that it's,
Yeah,
I don't know why I don't even know how they had the authority to abandon it.
I don't know, how did they have
I
the
don't
authority
know.
to do it?
Because that was the initial agreement. way back.
During the regionalization?
Yeah.
It was to
Oh.
help the roll.
We're talking 1969 or 70. They didn't go the route of Whittier.
Yeah, so the rolling average right now over the past 10 years, their percent enrollment, Newberry's averaged 29 to 31%, Rowley's averaged 31 to 33%, and Salisbury's averaged 36 to 39%. Newberry and Rowley's have been trending slightly down over the past 5 years, with Salisbury trending slightly up, but when I say slightly, it's like not even full percentage points. It's pretty standard over the last 5 years.
Won't you just run into the same bias, which is if I'm at the top of that rolling average, I don't wanna go for the rolling average.
That's, yeah, that's why, yes, because in order to change it, it has to get brought to all 3 town
Yeah.
meetings and pass all
Right.
3 town meetings, which again, it's
Fighting a
the,
losing battle almost, but I think.
it's, yeah, I think it's kind of a, like I said, I've spent some time visualizing it, I've laid out some things, I'm gonna share it with that group, and then that group will decide whether or not to even bring it back to the, we'll bring it back to the DCC and then decide whether or not it's something to look at, because
3 is a terrible number to have to arrive at a vote.
Yeah.
it is, it's, yeah. So there's more to come on that, but I think with that, we are through all of our agenda items. It is 8:44, and I would,
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
all those in favor? Aye.